The sun hung low over the fields, casting long shadows across the rows of heirloom tomatoes, squash, and fragrant lavender. Ethan Caldwell's boots sank into the soil as he walked along the edge of his family's land, the same land his great-grandfather had purchased with hard-earned gold coins over a century ago. He could hear the distant hum of a tractor as he moved past the old barn, its red paint weathered but proud, still standing after all these years. It had seen countless seasons, each one a testament to the hard work and vision of his ancestors. For Ethan, the farm was more than just a place to work, it was a living legacy, a connection to the past that refused to be broken. His great-grandfather had chosen this land for its natural spring and rich soil, perfect for farming. But it was the irrigation system his grandfather had engineered during the Dust Bowl that truly set this place apart, ensuring that even during the worst droughts, their crops would survive. The system had fed not just his family, but the entire county, providing water to neighboring farms when they needed it most. But now, all of that history was under threat. In recent years, suburban sprawl had slowly crept toward the Caldwell farm, and with it, the unwelcome presence of developers. New subdivisions sprouted like weeds, each house a shiny testament to progress. Ethan had fought to maintain the boundaries of his family's land, making sure it remained independent, exempt from the homeowners association rules that governed the new developments. It wasn't easy, but he had the law on his side. His farm was explicitly exempt from HOA control. Or so he thought. Then came Victoria Langley. The retired corporate attorney from Chicago had moved into Meadowbrook Estates and quickly maneuvered herself into the position of HOA president. With her platinum blonde hair and the kind of polished, almost surgical demeanor that came with years of boardroom battles, Victoria wasted no time making her presence known. She began a systematic campaign against Ethan's farm, calling it an eyesore that was tarnishing the charm of the neighborhood. Each week, like clockwork, certified letters arrived at his door, listing violations, imaginary violations, that were clearly meant to force him into submission. The red barn his grandfather had built with his own hands, once a symbol of pride for tourists passing through, was suddenly deemed a non-compliant structure. His historic silo was declared an unauthorized building, and even the roosters that had crowed on the farm for generations became a noise violation. Ethan had heard about people like her, the ones who came into a community with a sense of entitlement, looking to bend everything around them to their will. But Victoria Langley wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind of person who would go to any lengths to get what she wanted. And Ethan knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Ethan barely had time to shake off the frustration of yet another bogus HOA violation before the harassment escalated. At first, it was just the letters. Then came the unannounced inspections. One morning, while he was repairing a section of his fence, a pair of county environmental inspectors pulled up in a shiny white truck, clipboard in hand, demanding access to his land. They claimed there had been an anonymous report about chemical runoff contaminating the local creek. Ethan frowned. His farm was strictly organic. He never used pesticides, never sprayed anything on his crops that wasn't natural. But when they led him to the edge of his property, his stomach clenched. A rusted metal barrel sat half-buried near the waterline, its lid pried open. Bold black letters spelled out hazardous pesticide across its side. The inspectors wasted no time taking photos, shaking their heads. Ethan had no idea where it came from. His farm had never stored anything like that. The realization hit him like a gut punch. This was planted ***. Someone had put it there to frame him. He didn't need to guess who was behind it. By that afternoon, Victoria Langley was already talking to the local news, standing at the entrance of Meadowbrook Estates with a perfectly rehearsed look of concern. "We all want to be good neighbors," she said to the cameras, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "but the evidence is clear. Mr. Caldwell's farm is putting our families at risk. I think it's time we have a real discussion about whether this kind of operation belongs in our community anymore." Ethan watched the broadcast, fury building in his chest. He called Bill Harper, his attorney and longtime friend, who didn't mince words. "They're setting you up," Bill said. "First the fines, now this? They're pushing you into a corner, trying to make you look like a liability." He advised Ethan to install security cameras, something Ethan had been reluctant to do. "You don't fight dirt with dirt, but you sure as hell don't let them bury you in it." The county inspectors found no evidence that Ethan's farm had caused any pollution, and the case was dropped. But the damage was done. Some of the local restaurants that bought his produce started canceling their orders. A few of the parents at Jefferson Elementary pulled out of the school's farm-to-table program, saying they just wanted to be careful. Victoria's smear campaign had worked, at least for now. But Ethan wasn't about to roll over. He kept farming, kept pushing forward, determined not to let a corrupt HOA president and her pack of developers steal the land his family had built from nothing. Then came April 18th, the day Ethan would never forget. He had just finished unloading a truck of fresh produce at Jefferson Elementary when his phone buzzed. Maggie, the frantic edge in her voice sent his heart hammering. "Ethan, they're here. Bulldozers, they're tearing down the fence." He barely heard the rest. The keys were already in the ignition. The old Ford roared to life, gravel flying as he tore down the road. The 15-minute drive home felt like a lifetime. When he finally pulled onto his property, his breath caught in his throat. The fence was gone. The century-old posts his grandfather had driven into the earth lay splintered on the ground. Two yellow Caterpillar bulldozers were rolling forward, tearing deep scars into the land. And his barn, his family's barn, was already halfway destroyed, ***. A crowd had gathered just beyond the police line. Some Meadowbrook residents watched in discomfort, clearly uneasy. Others stood with their arms crossed, nodding in approval. And there, standing beside a uniformed officer, was Victoria Langley, looking calm, collected, and every bit as satisfied as a cat that had just swallowed a canary. Ethan jumped out of his truck, charging toward the machines, but a sharp hand grabbed his arm. He turned, fists clenched, only to find Deputy Eric Collins, Victoria's brother-in-law, blocking his path. "You need to step back, Mr. Caldwell," the deputy said with a smirk, tightening his grip. "This land has been legally seized by the HOA under an emergency community development order." Ethan's vision blurred with rage. "That's a lie," he snarled. "You have no legal authority to do this. My property is protected by county ordinances." Victoria stepped forward then, a leather portfolio in her hands. She opened it, revealing what looked like official county documents, complete with a seizure notice signed by a judge. "It's all been approved, Ethan," she said smoothly, like she was discussing a minor zoning issue rather than stealing a man's home. "You had every opportunity to sell, to be reasonable. Now, we're simply moving forward with progress." The deputy shoved Ethan back as one of the bulldozers slammed into the barn's foundation, sending a crash of splintered wood into the air. The structure groaned, wavered, then collapsed in on itself. Maggie was filming everything on her phone, tears streaking her face, but before she could capture more, another officer grabbed her wrist and ripped the phone away. "You're interfering with an official government order," he said coldly. Ethan fought harder, twisting against the deputy's grip, shouting that this was illegal, that it was a fraud, but Eric Collins only laughed. "Should have taken the money when it was offered, old man." Ethan's world tilted as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. He barely registered the cheering from a few of the Meadowbrook residents. From the back of the squad car, he watched as the last of the barn's roof collapsed, the wooden beams his grandfather had harvested from their own trees reduced to nothing but dust and splinters. The nightmare didn't end there. 6 hours later, they released him from the county jail without charges, because no legal charges existed. And when Ethan and Bill reviewed the seizure notice Victoria had waved around so confidently, they discovered the truth. It was an elaborate forgery. The county had never approved any land seizure. Victoria and her developers had faked the entire operation, counting on Ethan being too overwhelmed, too beaten down to fight back. She had destroyed generations of his family's history on a foundation of nothing but lies. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, his hands gripping a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the mess of papers spread before him. Property deeds, land surveys, water rights documents, every legal thread tying his family to this land. Victoria Langley had played her hand, but she had underestimated him. She thought bulldozers and falsified documents would break him. She thought an arrest would scare him into submission. She was wrong. Bill Harper, his attorney, sat across from him, jaw tight, flipping through the forged seizure notice. They didn't just steal your land, Ethan. They committed fraud, destruction of private property, conspiracy. This is criminal. He ran a hand through his graying hair, shaking his head. The fact that a sheriff's deputy backed them up? That's even worse. The next morning, they filed for an emergency injunction, and within hours, a judge agreed to halt all further development on the land. But Ethan wasn't interested in stopping the project. He wanted it undone. He wanted his farm restored, every fence post replaced, every acre returned. He wanted Victoria to pay for what she'd done. In court, Victoria arrived looking poised, dressed in a tailored blue suit, flanked by her high-priced legal team. She sat at the defendant's table with that same smug expression she always wore, as if this was just another minor obstacle she would handle before lunch. But she wasn't expecting Ethan to come armed with a paper trail longer than her entire career. When the judge called the case to order, Victoria's lawyers claimed the land had legally transferred to the HOA under adverse possession laws. They argued that Ethan had neglected portions of his land, allowing the HOA to claim it through sustained community improvements. It was a weak argument, but they weren't counting on winning fairly, Ethan stood up, calm but firm, and handed over his great-grandfather's original deed from 1887, signed in careful script, a legal record of ownership that had never once changed hands. Then came the 1994 development agreement, the one that explicitly exempted his farm from HOA control in perpetuity. The courtroom fell silent as the documents were read aloud. But the final blow came when Bill played the security footage from the day of the demolition. The room tensed as Victoria's voice rang out through the speakers, clear as day, arrogant, undeniable. Make sure you clear this whole section. The condos need full, unobstructed views. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even the judge's expression darkened. Victoria shifted in her seat, for the first time looking genuinely uneasy. Bill let the silence settle before speaking. Your Honor, this isn't about a dog park. This is a real estate scam, disguised as a community project. The seizure notice was a forgery. The HOA board is actively involved in fraud, trespassing, and destruction of property, and we have the evidence to prove it. The judge had no choice but to grant Ethan a temporary legal hold on all further construction. But when Ethan demanded full property restoration, the judge hesitated. This is a complex matter that will require a full trial, he said, setting a court date for 3 months later. Victoria smirked, as if that delay was a victory. But Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. She wasn't used to being cornered. That night, Ethan and Bill went back through the files, digging through old land contracts, trying to find anything that could accelerate the process. It was late, well past midnight, when Bill suddenly sat up straighter, flipping through a yellow document from 1912. Wait, Bill muttered, tracing a finger over a section of fine print. His expression shifted from confusion to realization, to something close to astonishment. Ethan, look at this. Ethan leaned in, scanning the dense legal language. His grandfather had secured water rights to the entire subdivision decades before Meadowbrook was even built. But the most critical part was buried in the final clause. In the event of an unauthorized seizure or disruption of agricultural operations on the Caldwell farm, the Water Authority reserves the right to terminate all easements associated with residential water supply, effective immediately upon written notice. Ethan's breath caught. The HOA wasn't connected to city water. When Meadowbrook was developed, the builders had taken a shortcut, using the existing Caldwell irrigation system instead of paying to extend municipal lines. Every single home in Meadowbrook depended on water that ran through pipes built by Ethan's grandfather. And Victoria Langley had just violated the very clause that kept that water flowing. Bill let out a slow, knowing chuckle. They just handed you the biggest legal weapon imaginable. Ethan leaned back, heart pounding, a slow grin spreading across his face. She wanted my land, he said. Fine. Let's see how she does without my water. The next morning, Ethan filed an official notice with the County Water Authority, terminating all residential water access to Meadowbrook Estates, effective in 30 days. Then, just to make sure every single resident knew exactly who to blame, he personally walked from house to house, handing out printed copies. Some slammed their doors in his face. Others looked genuinely concerned. But by the end of the day, Victoria was calling an emergency HOA meeting, her voice rising in panic. She thought she had won. She had no idea the fight had just begun. The sun was high over Meadowbrook Estates, casting sharp shadows over the freshly installed wrought iron fence encircling the Whitmore Dog Park, named after none other than Victoria Langley herself. The grand opening was an extravagant affair, the kind of spectacle that Victoria excelled at. There were white canopies, a catered buffet, photographers snapping pictures, and a local news crew there to capture the moment. Children ran around with their golden retrievers and poodles, while HOA members sipped champagne from crystal flutes. Victoria stood at the center of it all, smiling for the cameras, basking in her latest victory. Ethan stood just beyond the fence line, arms crossed, watching the charade. The land beneath that park was still his, no matter what forged documents and bulldozers had tried to erase. And by morning, every single one of them would understand that. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the newly laid gravel path, cutting through the chatter and laughter as he approached. The murmurs spread, conversations faltering. The smug look on Victoria's face barely wavered as she turned toward him. Ethan, she greeted, voice syrupy sweet. I'd invite you to celebrate, but I doubt you'd appreciate the finer details of progress. A few HOA members laughed under their breath. Ethan let the moment stretch, then held up a folded legal document. This is a termination notice, he said, voice calm but firm. As of today, all residential water easements to Meadowbrook Estates have been revoked. A hush spread across the crowd, uncertainty rippling through the homeowners. Victoria's smile faltered for a split second before she scoffed, shaking her head. This is nonsense, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He's just a bitter old farmer trying to stir up drama. Don't let him ruin the celebration. Ethan took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear. Your entire subdivision runs on water from my grandfather's system, he said. You took my land, Victoria. Now I'm taking something back. She blinked. For the first time, her confidence wavered. You can't, she hissed under her breath, her grip tightening on her clipboard. The county won't allow it. Ethan smiled. They already did, He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in stunned silence in front of a growingly uneasy crowd. It didn't happen all at once. That was the beauty of it. At first, everything seemed fine. Sprinklers still sprayed across pristine lawns, and glasses still filled from kitchen faucets. But by mid-afternoon, things started to change. The pressure in the pipes dropped. By 4 o'clock, bathroom faucets sputtered and died. At 5, an HOA resident ran outside, yelling across the street to his neighbor that his toilets wouldn't flush. By 6, chaos erupted. Victoria had just lifted a champagne glass for a self-congratulatory toast when her phone buzzed violently with incoming messages. Homeowners panicked, flooding the HOA board's group chat with desperate complaints. No water in the kitchen. The sprinklers just stopped working. Our pool pump just shut down. What's happening? Did the county shut off service? By nightfall, Meadowbrook Estates had become a community on edge. The grand opening was long forgotten as families stormed the HOA clubhouse, demanding answers. Inside, Victoria sat at the head of a long mahogany table, her calm mask slipping, her voice shrill with controlled panic as she reassured the board that everything would be handled. "This is temporary," she insisted, flipping through legal documents, her hands shaking just slightly. "The county will override his claim, Anne." A board member, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, cut her off. "Victoria, the county already confirmed it. They can't override his rights." She froze. What? The Caldwell easement was a private agreement, predating the city's water regulations, he continued, wiping his forehead. "It's untouchable. The only way to restore water is to settle with him." The words hit like a slap. Victoria snatched her phone, dialing Ethan's number with shaking fingers. It rang twice before he answered, his voice steady, satisfied. "Turn the water back on," she ordered, skipping pleasantries. Ethan leaned against his truck, gazing out at his farm, completely unaffected by the crisis unfolding in Meadowbrook. "I made my demands clear," he said simply. "Full restoration of my farm. Financial compensation for damages, a binding contract exempting my land from HOA interference, permanently." Victoria gritted her teeth. "This is extortion." "No, Victoria," Ethan said. This is justice, She slammed the phone down, knuckles white. But the board members were already looking at her differently. Some of them had never truly agreed with what she had done. They had just gone along with it because she made them believe it was for the greater good. But now, they were watching their pristine paradise dry up before their eyes because of her arrogance. By the next morning, the entire subdivision was in crisis. Toilets refused to flush. Lawns started turning brown under the summer heat. The luxury homes, built for comfort and convenience, had become unbearable. And worse? The news had gotten wind of it. A local reporter stood outside the clubhouse, microphone in hand, broadcasting live as furious residents shouted behind her. "Victoria Langley, the HOA president, is under fire after a legal loophole has left this high-end community without water." Sources confirm that the entire subdivision was dependent on a private water system that was illegally taken from a longtime landowner, who has now exercised his rights to shut it down. Residents are calling for her resignation, and legal experts say this could result in serious charges of fraud and property destruction. The camera zoomed in as Victoria stormed into the clubhouse, ignoring reporters, her face pale, her grip tight on her phone. She was losing control. And Ethan Caldwell was just getting started. Victoria Langley had spent years building an empire of power over Meadowbrook Estates, but in just 5 days, it all crumbled around her. The water crisis had turned the once pristine neighborhood into a battleground, and when news of the fraud broke, residents finally saw her for what she was, not a protector of their community, but a self-serving tyrant who had gambled with their homes and lost. By day 3, a petition calling for Victoria's resignation had already gathered over 85% of homeowner signatures. By day 4, the district attorney opened a formal investigation into the forged seizure documents, which meant that the HOA itself was now facing a potential class action lawsuit from homeowners who had unknowingly funded Victoria's illegal land grab. By day 5, she was finished. At the emergency HOA meeting, a furious crowd filled the clubhouse, many of them still unable to shower, cook, or even flush their toilets. Victoria tried to regain control, claiming she had a plan in place, but no one was listening. When Jim Mitchell, one of the longest-standing residents, stood up and read her secret financial records aloud, including the $250,000 payout she had received from the developers before the land was seized, the entire room turned on her. "You were selling us out the whole time," one homeowner snapped. "We trusted you," another shouted. And then came the final blow, an HOA board vote, unanimous, to remove her from power immediately. Victoria stormed out, humiliated, but it didn't stop there. The county revoked her law license pending an ethics review, and her name became synonymous with corruption in real estate circles. When she finally put her house up for sale, the listing sat untouched for months. No one wanted to live in the house of a disgraced HOA dictator. But for Ethan Caldwell, this fight was never about revenge. It was about his family's legacy, his land, and the generations before him who had worked that soil with their bare hands. In the months that followed, his farm was fully restored, the barn rebuilt exactly as it had stood for decades before Victoria tried to erase it. More than that, the community that had once sided with the HOA against him had now become his greatest supporters. The people who once sent him complaints were now volunteering to help replant the crops that had been bulldozed. The state passed a new law strengthening property rights for independent farmers, unofficially dubbed Caldwell's Law. Skyline developers abandoned their condo plans, and Meadowbrook's new HOA board formally recognized his farm as an independent landmark, forever protected from further interference. Standing in the newly rebuilt barn, surrounded by neighbors turned friends, Ethan realized something he never expected. Victoria Langley's attempt to destroy him had done the opposite, it had made his farm stronger than ever. The HOA thought they could erase history with a few legal tricks and a bulldozer, but they forgot one simple truth: some things are worth fighting for. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.